Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Cristian Toscano. I am a researcher at Flaxo Ecuador University and a program manager at El Terreno Cultural Exchange Center here in Ecuador. And today I will be sharing insights from our recent study on sociodemographic and economic trends across Ecuador's central highlands, focusing especially on what these findings means for Bolivar or work at El Terreno. I will share my screen. Yep. Okay, so this was a consultancy carried out by Pablo Velasco, my colleague, and myself for the United Nations Development Program last year and for the Catholic University of Ecuador. And let's start. So I want to start with this question. Why this study matters? Between 2010 and 2022, the province of Tungurahua, Cotopaxi, Chimborazo, and Bolivar have experienced major shifts in population, livelihoods, and access to basic services. While some urban areas have grown rapidly, many rural and indigenous territories are losing population, facing climate challenge, and also a limit state investment. So with this study, I want to answer a quick question. How are these transformations reshaping life in the Andean highlands, and what can we do about it? Yes, so the objectives of the study combine quantitative and qualitative approach, analyze census data to understand demographic economic change, conduct interviews in indigenous communities, examine rural-urban migration and its causes, identify territorial inequalities in access to services, and provide evidence-based and recommendation for public policy and local action here in Ecuador. So here, the Central Highland are the geographic and economic heart of Ecuador. They connect the country's three main poles. We have three main poles here in Ecuador: Quito here, Guayaquil in the Guayas province, and Cuenca here in Azuay. And also some information about this region. The altitude is from 100 to 1,300 meters above sea level. And this region has an immense agricultural potential, livestock production, and tourism appeal. But we have also deep inequalities and administrative fragmentation. In 2010, these four provinces, Cotopaxi, Tungurahua, Bolivar, and Chimborazo, represent 10.7% of Ecuador's total population. And by 2022, that number reached 1.7 million. But their shape of the national population decreased to 10%, showing uneven growth and emerging challenges. Indigenous presence and diversity. So the Central Highlands are home to a significant indigenous population that shapes its cultural and social fabric. According to 2022 national census, 25% of the total population of Cotopaxi, Tungurahua, Chimborazo, and Bolivar self-identify as indigenous. And these four provinces together represent 1/3 of Ecuador's entire indigenous population. So in other words, out of every three indigenous inhabitants in the country, in Ecuador, lives in this region. Yes, so in this region we have also main indigenous group, for example, Panzaleo in Cotopaxi, Quizapincha, Ansalasaca in Tungurahua, Puruá in Chimborazo, and Guaranca in Bolivar, where El Terreno is located. Geographically, indigenous territories form a continuous mountain belt running from Saquicili and Sitges in the north of this region to Alausi in the south. It shows that in this region we have an intercultural root and rural identity. So I want to share with you this table that shows the main indigenous people and nationalities distributed across the 4 provinces of this region. As we can see, there is a strong diversity of identities. For example, in Cotopaxi, we have Panzaleo indigenous group. We have also Quichua's indigenous group. In Tungurahua, we can see that we have a lot of population of Quichua's group, indigenous group, and also Tome Bela. And in Bolivar, as I said, we have Huaranca, but also Quichua indigenous group. Like I said, in total, these 4 provinces are home of 1/3 of all indigenous people in Ecuador. And here, I want to focus on Bolivar. We can see how this diversity is expressed territorially. Here we have a table, and each column shows the percentage of population but by ethnic group in each canton. For example, in Guaranda, there is the percentage of mestizo peoples, on the indigenous people. For example, in Guaranda, we have 53% of indigenous people in Guaranda, where El Terreno is located. And also, I want to say that in Guaranda is the cultural heart of the province. And also, we have other cantons like Echendia or San Miguel that have a smaller but visible indigenous population, while, for example, Las Naves and Caluma are more mestizo dominate. And also in Bolivar, we can say that indigenous residents represent about 1 in every 4 people in the province. That this means that Bolivar is not only a rural or agricultural region, but it's also a deeply intercultural territory where indigenous communities are central to its identity and future for this province. But now that we have seen how diverse and intercultural the Central Highlands are, it's important to recognize that diversity often goes hand in hand with inequality. Let's look this table. This table shows poverty levels based on NVI indicator. That means unsatisfied basic needs. For example, as you can see, there is a clear correlation between ethnic self-identification and poverty levels. For example, in Cotopaxi, 78% of indigenous people live in poverty, compared to 39% among mestizos. In Chimborazo, 71% 71% on indigenous live in poverty, compared to 25% of mestizo people, or blanco even. And in Bolivar, where the terrain is located, poverty among indigenous people reach 84%. The highest in the Central Highlands, the highest percentage in this region in Bolivar. Across all four provinces, the national average confirms this pattern. Indigenous poverty stands at 68%, double the national mestizo rate, 33%. That this means that in Ecuador, poverty is not just matter of income. It's deeply linked to ethnicity, territory, and access to public services. We will see after that. And now we have these patterns also holds true when we look at poverty, especially. Here we have a map showing the percentage of rural population experience poverty by parish. Parish is the lead, it's like the subdivision in cities. So it's the smallest subdivision in Ecuador. So here, this map show poverty in parish across this region. The darker the red, the higher the level of poverty. And you can see that the most affected areas are rural. And like I said before, in this mountain belt, precisely where most indigenous communities live. These are territories located far from urban centers where access to water, sanitation, education, healthcare remains limited. So I want to say that this map reminds us that poverty in the Andes is not random and is territorial. It concentrates where the state's presence is weakest and where climate impacts hit hardest. No, I want to share with you these two maps side by side. On left, we see the percentage of population that self-identifies as indigenous by parish, like I showed you before. The greener the area, the higher the indigenous presence. But on the right, we have the percentage of rural population living in poverty based on unsatisfied basic needs. Here, like I said, the darker red tones indicate higher levels of poverty. And if you look closely, the same mountainous belt that appears green of left, where the indigenous communities live, also appears dark red on the right, showing the highest poverty levels. So this spatial overlap reveals a powerful reality. Ethnicity, geography, and poverty are deeply connected in this region. Now, let's take a look at this table. It shows the percentage of households with access to basic services like drinking water, waste collection, sewage systems, and electricity, divided between urban and rural area coverage. So as you can see, in urban areas, access is almost universal. For example, in Bolivar, drinking water in urban area, we have 98% of coverage. The same thing with waste collection and also with electricity, 99% of coverage of electricity in Bolivar. In urban areas, I can say that more than 95% of households are connected to electricity and water networks. And also, for example, Tungurahua, urban coverage for water and sewage reach 99%. But when we move to rural areas, the number drops dramatically. For example, in Cotopaxi, only 31% of rural households have access to sewage systems. In Chimborazo, it's 29%, and in Bolivar, where El Terreno is located, the situation is even more critical. Only 70% of rural homes are connected to any sewage network. Um, Even basic waste collection and drinking water are far lower in the countryside, around 60% for water and 50% for waste collection. So this table, I want to say that this table illustrates not only a service gap, but it reflects a territorial divide. While urban centers are almost fully covered, rural but indigenous communities remain largely excluded from public infrastructure. So let's see this map. This map shows the percentage of households that have access to all basic public services. Like I said before, drinking water, waste collection, sewage system, and electricity across the Central Highlands, Cotopaxi, Tungurahua, Bolivar, and Chimborazo. And yes, the pattern is clear. The urban centers of Ambato, Latacunga, Riobamba concentrate most of the adequate public services, and we can see here in blue. But in the other hand, we have rural areas that appears almost entirely in red. And that means that in these areas, we have a lack of this kind of infrastructure. The red zones you see here represent about 29% of the region's total population. In these areas, 4 of every 5 homes are missing at least one essential service. It could be water, electricity, waste collection, or sewage systems. In other words, we can say that what's considered normal in cities, turning on a tap or having waste collected, remains a daily challenge in rural communities, in rural areas. So another information we have from this consultancy is the access to the digital access. And this slide and this table shows the evolution of digital access both in urban and rural areas across the Central Highlands from 2010 to 2022. It focuses on 3 key indicators: cell phone ownership, computer access, and internet services. And maybe let's start with the good news. Access to cell phone. Access to cell phone has grown a lot and is now the most widespread digital tool in urban area, but also in rural area, as we can see. For example, in urban areas, cell phone access exceeds 90% in all provinces: Cotopaxi, Tungurahua, Chimborazo, Bolivar. And however, the gap remains very wide when it comes to computer and internet connection, especially in rural areas. For example, in Chimborazo, only 70% of households have a computer. And in Bolivar, as you can see here, only 10% of households have a computer. The same thing with internet, only 37% have internet in Chimborazo, and in Bolivar uh, only 29% has these services. Yes, internet coverage has improved, but in many rural areas, it still reaches only 1 in 3 families. Uh, this table means that while mobile connectivity is expanding rapidly, um, a true digital inclusion is still limited. For example, public services, education, we can say that public services, education, and community initiatives must adapt to mobile first access, because we can see that a lot of people has a cell phone, not a computer. So the cell phone for these families is the entry point to the digital world. So we have to take into account this information for public policy, for community initiatives, or yeah. Also, we have from this consultancy, we have information about university education. And this table uh, show access to higher education, especially the percentage of people who are currently attending or have attended university, comparing across urban and rural areas in each province. In urban areas, participation in higher education ranged from 26% in Cotopaxi to 46 in Tungurahua, for example. But in rural areas, the numbers drop dramatically. For example, in Cotopaxi, only 10%, yes, only 10% of people are in university. And in Chimborazo, for example, we have only 8%, and in Bolivar, only 10%. So this this graphic means that rural people are up to 4 or 5 times less likely to access university education compared to their urban peers. If we look at the second column, uh, those who have completed 4 level or postgraduate studies, the gap widens even further, showing how education opportunities are strongly concentrated in urban centers. So I want to finish this section saying that the data we have seen so far highlight the urgent need for local governments to rethink how they plan and how they deliver services in the Central Highlands. So based on these findings, there are several key discussions that should begin at the local level. For example, it's really important to close service gaps, addressing the persistent deficits in basic structure, water, sanitation, education, especially in rural areas. Also, it's really important to improve rural conditions, like, for example, investing in better public facilities, connectivity, and opportunities that could make rural life sustainable and dignified. Also, adopting an intercultural and participatory approach, for example, placing local actors, indigenous leaders, and community organizations at the center of the territorial planning and decision making. Yes, this is not only about public policy, it's about justice, equity, and giving voice to the territories that sustain the Andes region. No, I want to talk about population growth. And here we have a graph that shows population growth projections for the four provinces of the Central Highlands. For example, we have in orange Bolivar, in blue we have Cotopaxi, in green Chimborazo, and in maroon we have Tungurahua. For example, we have two main groups. We have Cotopaxi and Tungurahua. For example, Cotopaxi has the highest growth rate, about 1.1% per year, and Tungurahua follows with 0.8%. But in contrast, we have Bolivar and Chimborazo that show a very low growth, only 0.3% and 0.2% per year, respectively. And this stagnation can be explained by two main factors normally. One factor could be a decline or in birth rates, and another factor could be population loss due to migration, when people move into other provinces or abroad. So we have these two main factors that could explain these population growth trends. So in short, while some provinces keep expanding, others, especially Bolivar and Chimborazo, are slowly emptying out. I want to share with you this map and table that illustrate how entire cities are losing population, particularly in rural zones. For example, the red areas show negative growth if we compare data from the census of 2010 and 2020. And we have some examples. For example, Colta in Chimborazo. Chimborazo, we have Colta, has lost nearly 1 out of every 3 inhabitants since 2010. Also, we have similar trends in Alausí, also in Saquicili and Chunchi. So in these cities, we can see a consistent population decline. Yes, yes. Internal migration from this region goes mainly to Pichincha, 45%, Guayas, 14%, and other provinces within the Highlands, 13%. Yes, I want to say that these movements reflect not only economic pressures, but also a search for better access to education, health, and infrastructure. And also, I want to say that rural territories are not simply losing people, they are losing young people, skills, and even future labor force that we need for local development. Yes, also I want to share with you this graphic that help us to understand the deeper connection between poverty and the population. And each point represent a parish in this region. And yes, this graphic compare the percentage change in population between 2010 and 2022, and the percentage of households in poverty by unsatisfied basic needs. Yes, and the trend is very clear. The poorer the parish, the faster it loses population. In other words, people are not living by choice. They are being pushed out by poverty, like lack of opportunities and unequal access to services. And also, in these slides, I want to share what people themselves told us during the interviews that we conducted in Tío Cajas Palacio Guatana, an indigenous community in Guamote, in Chimborazo provinces, and also Sacha is an indigenous community in Salcedo in Cotopaxi. We spoke with 19 residents, including farmers, young people, mothers, community leaders, teachers. Yes, and their stories reveal very clearly why migration has become a strong force in the central highlands. And we have some factors to explain why people are leaving these territories. The first factor they say is the lack of stable employment. People tell us directly, for example, there are no steady jobs here. And in some cases, we work, but they don't pay us. Yes, and this insecurity makes it almost impossible to plan the future. We have another factor mentioned in the interviews is the fact that are many families face growing labor instability. For example, informal work, short-term contracts, um, and even when people do find work, they often get paid late or far less than promised. For example, people said in the interviews, sometimes we work the whole month and they pay us almost nothing. Third, there are major agricultural losses. These communities depend heavily on farming and livestock, but climate shocks like frost, las heladas, droughts, irregular rains, and combined with very low market prices mean people are losing money even when they work hard. One farmer, for example, in Tio Cajas, in this community, said us, the frost burned everything. We lost the whole fight. Another another person in Sacha said potatoes are sold for so little that we lose money. And fourth, families highlight the low and declining price of milk, especially after the pandemic. Dairy used to be a stable income source, but today it's not longer enough to support a family. For example, someone said the price of milk dropped and we couldn't recover. Also, we have another important factor is growing household debt. People borrow to plant, to buy feed for animals, but when production fails, they fall deeper into debt. As one resident said, we borrow to plant, but when crops fail, we get into more debt. And finally, people mentioned the persistent lack of basic services. drinking water, like I said, sewage, medicine, or local health facilities. For example, in Tiocajas, a community leader told us, we still don't have water or drainage. They said, the authorities said, we are too few people to invest in. So this creates a sense of abandonment and pushes families to leave. Like, so overall, migration here is not just about economics, it's about combination of economic insecurity, climate stress, debt, and lack of public services, institutional neglect. And people migrate not because they want to, but because staying becomes too hard, how you say, yeah, too uncertain and sometimes too risky to their families. Yes, no, let's look at where people are actually moving to. These three maps show the main attraction poles during the last 5 years in Cotopaxi, Chimborazo, and Bolivar. And what we can see here is, for example, migrants from Cotopaxi move towards Pichincha, could be Quito, but also they move to Tungurahua, Tungurahua and Bato. People from Chimborazo move to Quito mainly. Also, they move to Tungurahua and Bato, but also they move to Guayas, Guayaquil. And people from Bolivar, migrants from Bolivar, for this province, we have two main poles of attraction. The first pole is Quito, Pichincha province, but also Tungurahua, and particularly Ambato. Yes, so now I want to share a quick example with you about this attraction pole, Ambato, in Tungurahua. So when indigenous families migrate from rural areas in the central highlands, they don't always move directly to the city center. In many cases, they move in the peri-urban belt, the surrounding parishes where land is more affordable or where they have community networks, for example. And here we have two maps. And here we compare indigenous presence in Ambato in 2010 and 2022. And what we can see is a clear intensification of indigenous settlement in parishes like Huachi Grande, Montalvo, Santa Rosa, Juan Benigno Vela. Yes, and these areas have absorbed as a significant share of rural out-migration. But I want to share with you an important point. Even, even if these zones are close to the city, to the center of the city, these zones often lack of basic public services: water, sewage, waste collection, schools, public transportation. So families leave the rural communities looking for better opportunities, but they end up in a new peripheries that reproduce many of the same vulnerabilities they were trying to escape. Yes, so overall, this graphic shows us that migration is not only rural to urban, but is also rural to peri-urban, a transition zone where services are limited, planning is weak, and inequalities become more visible. Now, we have been looking at internal migration until now, but the truth is that a very large part of all migration from the Central Highlands is international. But it's not fully visible in the census because a lot of people migrate illegally, for example, to United States, to Spain. And also over the last 5 to 8 years, irregular migration has increased significantly. Many families told us that people live without documents, without formal registration, and sometimes without the intention of returning. And like I said, most of these migrants go to United States, often through dangerous routes. Others go to Spain or even Chile in South America. This means that the census figures actually underestimate the real scale of population loss in rural territories because we have no data for that. And also, I want to share some voices from the field. For example, uh, people from Tio Cajas, Palacio Guatana, said, my brother left for the United States. He said he had no choice. The land doesn't produce anymore. Another mother in Sacha said, my son is in Chile. He left because there was no work here and their debts were suffocating us. Um, Also, a community leader in Guamote said, people here don't register their departure. They leave quietly at night. So it's really interesting, all that. So this is a traduction from Spanish, so I hope this traduction is correctly. And also, yes, it's really important to say that this means that the demographic and emotional impact of rural communities is much bigger than what official statistics show. Yes, so to close this section, it's important to highlight how international migration is reshaping rural life in the Central Highlands. Uh, in many rural communities, the outflow of people has reduced school enrollment because children migrate with their parents. At the same time, the population is aging because those who live are mostly young adults, the people who traditionally sustain agriculture, community organization, and local leadership. So this means that migration is not only a demographic change, it's a transformation, like I said before, of the entire social fabric of rural communities. And today, uncertainty is growing with the recent change of administration in the United States. Many families express anxiety. They are very anxious about the immigration policies and the possibility of deportation. And also, I want to say all of that adds emotional stress and instability to families that are already fragmented by distance and economic pressure. And finally, to finish this presentation, I want to share with you some public policy recommendation we did uh, in this consultancy. Uh, yes, the first recommendation is the need to strengthen uh, to strengthen rural development. So local governments should promote sustainable agriculture production, improve access to markets, and invest in climate resilient technologies, climate policy, for example. Farmers repeatedly told us that climate shocks and low prices make their work increasingly unstable. So rural economies need direct support. The second recommendation is we must address the territorial inequality in basic services. Like we saw in this presentation, rural communities, rural parishes continues to face a major deficit in drinking water, sewage, sanitation, waste collection, and also expanding digital connectivity and public infrastructure is essential if we want people to stay in their territories. Uh, yes, yes, in this context, the role of the Mancomunidad de la Sierra Central is an organization that in which we can find, for example, the authorities from Tungurahua, Chimborazo, Bolívar, and Tungurahua, Chimborazo, Cotopaxi, and Bolívar. So the role of this Mancomunidad becomes critical. So this regional structure, like I said, exists, but it urgently needs to prioritize rural sectors. And Tungurahua, which stands out as the province with the strongest public services provision, could take the lead of promoting coordinated sub-regional efforts to reduce inequality across the Central Highlands. And also, it's important to advance sustainable urban planning policy because cities like Ambato, Riobamba, and Latacunga show growing housing construction, but also high rates of unoccupied units. So we didn't talk about this situation in this presentation, but in our consultancy we talk about that. So for us, it's really important to regulate urban growth and promoting affordable housing would prevent speculation and help vulnerable families to have access to dignified living conditions. And finally, it's really important that public policy include a strong intercultural and participatory approach. Indigenous communities represent, like we saw, one tier of the region's population. So our leaders and organizations must be actively involved in planning and decision making, not only as beneficiaries, but also as a key actors that shape the future of this region. And yes, overall, this recommendation wants aims to build a more balanced, inclusive, resilient region. One where rural life is viable, where young people can imagine a future, where migration could become a choice rather than an obligation. Then thank you so much. And if you have any question, don't hesitate to tell me.
Okay. Thank you so much, Christian. A very powerful and extensive research project. And I think you've brought together the information really clearly to make it really easily digestible for people. So thank you for taking the time to do your work and thank you for sharing it with us. So
Pleasure.
maybe we can take down the slides now. We'll move over to questions and answers. So this is your opportunity to ask Christian any questions you may have. For those who don't know me, my name is Joshua. I'm the founder and director of the El Terreno Cultural Exchange Center here in Guarande in the Bolivar province. And we've developed this presentation as a way to help educate the people who are going to be joining us here on their internships to understand a little bit more about the context in which they're working, which is really important. So we will be open. You can raise your hand if you have any questions. You can write them in the chat. And in the meantime, I've got a couple, both from myself and from some other people. So the first question from Maria is, did you have a hypothesis before you started this study? And is there anything that was surprising?
Sorry, say again, Joshua.
Did you have a hypothesis before you began the study? And was there anything that was surprising?
Yes, so our main hypothesis was yes, a lot of people from communities are leaving because they are struggling with public services, because they don't have jobs in these regions. But also, we were really surprised because a lot of people started to talk about climate crisis. For example, they started to talk about droughts. They started to talk about frozen heladas. And in our hypothesis, it was only economic factors of maybe public services factors. But when we conduct interviews, for example, we identified also these kind of problems related to climate crisis.
Thank you very much. And if nothing is done, this is another question from Maria. If nothing is done about the migration issue, if we look 30, 50 years into the future, what do we think the world and these regions specifically will look like?
Yes, it's really important to do something. That's why we conducted this research, this consultancy, and the main goal was um, the main goal of this research was that authorities in this region uh, are obligated to do something, especially what they can do in this moment, the basic, the access to public services. So it's the first thing, is their obligation. So it's really important for authorities to start with that. And for the national government, they can create, like I said, national public policy in order to help people, rural people, because in rural areas we have a big problem. And if nothing is done, we will lose this population. We will find in the future maybe a lot of cities, a lot of parish without people. And it's really important also to support communities, indigenous communities, rural communities, because they work on agriculture, they work of milk production, ganaderia, and in cities we buy these products. So it's really important, even if we that's why it's really important to do something, because even in cities we have a high coverage of public services. Maybe we cannot see the problem, but we buy products from these communities. These communities are producing a lot of things that in cities we buy. So it's really important to support these communities, authorities, NGOs, and yes, maybe other kind of initiatives.
Yeah, very good point. We rely ultimately on agriculture, especially in a country like Ecuador, where we don't have the same importation that countries in Europe and North America rely on. We rely on our own population for a large amount of the produce that we eat. So, very good point. I have a question from Celine. If you'd like to open your camera and microphone, it'd be great to hear your question.
Yeah, sorry about the camera. I have a little problem, but I have the microphone. Thanks, Joshua. Many thanks, Christian, for your presentation. As Joshua said, it was very interesting and extensive. I had a question. You talked a lot about those who leave the communities, indigenous communities, migration. What about those who stay? How do they adapt? What are their strategies, and what are they expecting from other organizations and public authorities to help this adaptation?
Yes, thank you, Celine. In this study, we didn't talk about that, but it's really important to talk about. We have migration, but we have also a lot of people that decided to stay in their territories because it's their own decision. But also a lot of people stayed in their territories because they don't have option. So we have a very good example, for example, in Sacha, in Salcedo, where a lot of young people migrate, especially to United States and Spain. But community leaders stayed in this community and decided to create their own projects in order to have another source of income, of revenue in their community, in his community. For example, they decided to create community tourism. They started to develop this tourism in this community, and also a lot of women started to learn the tricot to and also to produce, for example, clothes uh, from the alpaca lana. And also, I think it's really important that authorities, NGOs, etc., has to think also about people who decided to stay in their territories because they are struggling with this situation, with um, the lack of access to public services, lack of employment opportunities, etc. So it's important to think uh, about these two groups. They, yes, migrants, but also people who decided to stay, and we have to support these kind of initiatives that emerge from communities.
Fantastic, thank you. And also to put into perspective, at the time of recording, at the end of 2025, the American administration is working hard to send informal migrants back to Ecuador, often in a worse financial position when they left in the first place, because it's very expensive to get to the United States. So and many of them are not going to have the opportunity to go. So I think everything you're saying is very valid. Emmanuel, you have a question.
Yes, hello, thank you. Sorry, I'm in the metro. Get the camera for the question. But you also gave a bit of testimony. To know if you had some testimonies of people that left, then came back, but also the people that left, how they live it, far away from.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think that we're not hearing you very clearly. Could you maybe turn your your camera off and ask the question again?
Maybe, Emmanuel, you can write your question. It could be great. Thank you so much.
If you could write it in the chat, that would be fantastic, and I will make sure to say that. Okay, I've got another question. You've been mentioning about what local government can do. People watching this webinar are going to have very little opportunity to impact on that. But you've mentioned NGOs and other smaller local community organizations. So what would you recommend organizations such as us here at El Terreno and potentially the interns who come to participate in their projects, what can they do? Where do you think they can create the biggest amount of impact from the time that they would be here?
Yes, thank you, Joshua. I think maybe this public policy recommendation were addressed to authorities, political authorities in this region. But one of these recommendations could be also for NGOs or another associations, is to take into account the community, is to take into account community leaders, community members, to all the initiatives we have from NGOs, we have from associations, because they know their territory, they know where is their situation, and also I think we can have a lot of impact as an NGO, as an association, if we take into account their opinions, their knowledge about their territory, the knowledge about their culture. Yes, it could be my recommendation to NGOs.
Great, thank you. And then we have Emmanuel's question, so I will read that. Thank you for the analysis. Do you have any information about migrants adapting to their new countries and how they are perceived by the ones that stay in the communities?
Yes, thank you so much, Emmanuel. Is a good question. No, we don't have information about migrants in the new countries. We have information from their families that stayed in the communities, and yes, a lot of their families say that they are in a difficult situation because they are struggling to find a job, they are struggling to find an accommodation in the new countries. So it's a very hard situation for migrants according to their families because we didn't conduct interviews from to migrants. And also it was one of our recommendation for the future work, maybe a future consultancy project. It could be great to interview people who are in United States or who are now in Spain, for example. But also migrants, we have information how these migrants are perceived by the ones that stay in the communities. These migrants sent when they finally find a job, for example, they send money that helps, for example, families in the communities to build a house, or maybe if someone of the family gets sick, the migrants send money, but also a lot of migrants are sending money, for example, here in Sacha, this community in Cotopaxi, in order to build infrastructure, in order to adapt to climate challenges. But also they contribute to the fiestas patronales. I don't know how you say that in English. The party of the community, they send money, for example, in order to contribute. So migrants are really, really important for these communities, for these people who stayed in these communities.
Great, thank you. So I think we'll leave it there. We've reached over an hour of our time. Thanks again, Cristian, for, again, I've been running this project now for almost 5 years, and, just seeing this presentation again really impacts me and it helps me to realize how important this work is and how much needs to be done and how many lives it touches, and being able to put it into the context that you have really highlights all of the issues in a very dramatic way, at least for me. So thank you very much for the time and dedication putting that together. Thank you for all of the participants who have joined us today. It was great to have you on, and thanks for everybody who's been listening to the recording. If you don't know, first time you've come across us here at El Terreno and you'd like to find out more, either about the organization, the work we do, or even if you'd like to come and participate in volunteering or internships here in the rural Ecuadorian Andes, you can find out more on our website, www.elterrenoecuador.com, or you can visit us on social media at El Terreno Guarana. So thanks again. Until next time, it was great having you all here. Wishing you all the best with the rest of your days. Thanks again, Cristian.
Thank you so much, Joshua, and thank you for all the participants here in the webinar. And I hope this information could be useful for you to understand the context here in Ecuador and where we are working with El Terreno.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.